The chair, if I could, to the gentleman from Maryland, the chair has been very lenient in things being said. The previous speaker from the Democrats called the former president of the United States all kinds of things, and we sat here and let it go. Probably should have said something then. Maybe everyone should be careful about what they say. And the gentleman from Maryland is recognized for his 5 minutes of questioning, and we have to move fast.
Before we get to that, Mr. Chairman, those rules don't cover, the rules that govern this committee don't cover statements about
I'm talking about decorum I'm just talking about general decorum.
They do cover statements about members of the committee and members of the House.
And I've admonished the gentleman, he should watch what he says, just like other members should watch what they say about the former president of our country. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 5 minutes of questioning.
The former president is not a member of the committee.
I know that.
Protected by the House rules.
I understand
that
that.
govern these kinds of statements.
I understand that. The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes to question the witness.
Well, Mr. Durham, good afternoon. Appreciate you being here. Although I'm sure, as you expressed earlier, there are probably other places you'd rather be. I did want to follow up on your prior testimony about the trip that you and the Attorney General Barr took to Italy. And I wanted to ask you to elaborate on that. I take it that was at the point prior to you becoming special counsel, but not by much. Is that right?
It was prior to that. I think it was a while before.
The dates I've got, just to help out, August 15 and September 27th, 2019. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, and I was appointed special counsel in October of 2020, so more than a year before that.
Okay, and why did you go on that trip?
You know, I want to be careful as to what I'm authorized to say here, speaking outside the report, but I think members are probably aware of the fact that there was a particular person who supposedly had provided or had made statements to Papadopoulos. And Papadopoulos, not when he talked to the Australians, but when he was interviewed by the FBI, attributed information he had to this particular person who was a European. There was reason to believe that that person was in Italy, or had been in Italy.
All right, and let me ask, just to follow up on that, why did the Attorney General come with you to investigate that?
This is my understanding, and I mean, these weren't communications I had, but the Italian authorities wanted to deal with the person at an appropriate level, not with me, and so that's what that was about. That's my understanding.
All right, but was it unusual for the Attorney General of the United States to go on trips to interview witnesses, whether overseas or even domestically?
Yeah, he didn't, to my knowledge, the Attorney General didn't interview any witnesses. My understanding was that in accordance with what the Italian authorities wanted, he was going to did go over, and introduce me to them so that they would work with us to see if they could be of assistance in our locating a particular witness.
All right, so he personally traveled to Italy in the pursuit of this investigative lead?
In opening the door for our group
to pursue an investigative lead.
Yes,
all right, and then you said you'd been at the Department of Justice for 40 years?
I have been.
All right. Do you recall the Attorney General of the United States ever taking a step like that to travel overseas in pursuit of a lead in an investigation?
You know, I don't know. It may happen all the time. I can only talk by my experience. This is the
fair enough. And I take it that whatever investigation was done over there in Italy didn't lead to any type of prosecution or convictions in your investigation.
That's correct.
All right, I want to yield the remainder of my time to Mr. Schiff.
Mr. Durham, did you seek communications pertaining to someone named Mr. Bernard from a federal district judge?
I'm not, assuming that prosecutors go to judges for certain kinds of orders, they are typically sealed proceedings. I'm not speaking.
Did you seek an order
direct to your question, but I'm not going to comment on anything that I believe is under seal.
Did you seek a court order to obtain personal communications pertaining to Mr. Bernard?
I'm not going to speak beyond the report on that point, and I'm not going to violate any sealing orders.
I don't think it violates any sealing orders to tell us if you sought personal communications by court order. Did you?
Again, It's beyond the report.
Well, let's not even
Subject
make it
to sealing
specific to a
orders.
person. Did you seek court orders to obtain particular records, and were you denied by the judge?
I think the question is,
No,
intended
the
to
question is
suggest
what
that I don't
the
want to
question is what
disclose something I'm
The question is what I
uncomfortable
asked you, Mr. Durham. You get to give the answer, not the question. The question is, did you seek a court order to get records from a judge pertaining to private communications, and were you turned down by the judge for lack of a sufficient basis?
And I've told you
Yes
that
or no?
It's beyond the report. I don't think I'm authorized to talk about it, and I'm not going to violate
It's
any.
not beyond the
sealing orders.
report. It's not beyond the report.
Do you see anything in the report about that?
Yes. Did you seek an order, and were you turned down? And then did you seek to go around the court order by going to the grand jury?
No. You like to know what that was about?
What I would like to know, Mr. Durham, is did Mrs. Danahy, who resigned from your team, raise ethical concerns about your trying to go around the court order?
To my knowledge, no.
Then why did she leave?
I told you before, previously, that I have the highest regard for Ms. Danahy. Ms. Danahy and I are friends. Ms. Danahy, like everybody...
You know why she left, right?
I'm not
You do
sure
know the
why
answer
she
to the
left.
question. You know why she left, right?
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair now recognizes...
Mr. Chairman, if I might ask unanimous consent to offer
Sure.
2 articles for the record. The first is by Charlie Savage, Adam Goldman, and Katie Benner, How Barr's Quest to Find Flaws in the Russian Inquiry Unraveled.
Objection?
And then the second is Anna Mamigliano, Italy did not fuel U.S. suspicion of Russian meddling, Prime Minister says, both from the New York Times.
Without objection, the gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Durham, I've got a number of things I want to ask you, but do you desire to address what was being raised just now in fairness?
Yeah, apparently, Mr. Schiff's questions are from an unsourced New York Times article written by Charlie Savage. I don't believe that there's anything in that article that is attributed to Ms. Danahy. And my recollection, I could be mistaken, but my recollection is that Ms. Danahy did not comment, wasn't quoted in any way in that article. So to the extent that the New York Times wrote an article suggesting certain things, it is what it is.
All right. Was Danchenko's status as a paid informant, a confidential human source, concealed from you for any period of time?
I'm not sure that was concealed. We found that out. We were once.
When did you learn about it?
When we started to the investigation and the how long it took for the FBI to identify this principal subsource and why the principal subsource wasn't identified earlier, that's when we came across Danchenko. We then asked the Bureau for, we found out he was a confidential human source. We asked the Bureau for his informant file, and that's when we gleaned that information.
Okay, so it was from his informant file once you got that from the FBI. Was there any delay in furnishing that to you?
Not that I recall, no.
Do you have any recollection? You were investigating, you said, from May 2019. He was a CHS until October 2020.
Yes.
You know when in that period of time, roughly, you learned that he was a CHS?
Probably halfway through there, but I'm not certain.
Okay. Why didn't you interview him while he was a paid source for the FBI?
Let me see. So with respect to Mr. Danchenko, he was interviewed by the Bureau in January 2017. We had brought to the attention of the new administration and the FBI, Mr. Danchenko's circumstances, including the prior espionage case that they never resolved or addressed.
Right. I understand all those details. I'm asking why you didn't interview him.
So when we were dealing with that section, Mr. Danchenko was represented by counsel. Mr. Danchenko, as you may know in the normal course, you have to advise people whether they're subjects or targets of investigations, and we did not arrive at a point where we could interview Mr. Danchenko.
FBI made Danchenko a CHS on March 7, 2017, after the factual predicate for Crossfire Hurricane in the Steele dossier had collapsed in January 2017 in his interview because he could not corroborate the dossier, and he revealed to the FBI that he was not a Russian-based source, nor did he have a high-level network of sources. The next day, March 8, the FBI finalized talking points drafted by Lisa Page on direction of Andrew McCabe for use in briefing the Gang of Eight in Congress. And Congress was briefed prior to Director Comey's testimony on March 20. Now, Attorney General Barr told the nation in December 2019 that you were examining the continuation of the investigation beyond the January collapse of the supposed factual basis and looking at irregularities, misstatements, and omissions. Yet your report makes no mention of the March 8 talking points prepared for Congress. Why?
I mean, aware that there were talking points because it just wasn't part of the crux, the central portion of what we were reporting on.
I want the clerk to put up on the screen what is my submittal mark number 7 while I'm asking you this question. These talking points emerged into public as a defense exhibit in the Sussman case. They contained lurid allegations about Manafort operating high-level contacts with the Kremlin through Carter Page, that Steele had a primary subsource who was Russian-based, and that the primary subsource had a network of high-level Republican subsources. Same garbage that Danchenko had debunked in his January interview. These talking points were circulated among senior FBI leaders and Department of Justice leaders, more than a dozen passed on them. Did you interview them all about how this could occur or consider this material as the basis of prosecutable offenses?
We identified and interviewed many people in the FBI. I guess I would have to know who this particular email was circulated to be able to tell you whether we interviewed each of those persons or not.
Last point, I guess, because I'm about out of time. You identify the failure of the FBI to interview Dolan as sort of inexplicable. Totally agree. But as I go through your report and look, there are people who declined to be interviewed, not only Dolan, Danchenko, McComey, McCabe, Priestap, Strzok, Page, Glenn Simpson, among others. It seems inexplicable to me that you didn't compel their testimony. Can you explain that at all?
First, let me make it clear that it is as disappointing, perhaps more disappointing to me and my colleagues that these people would not agree to be interviewed. You know, some of them had a lot to say publicly, but they refused to be interviewed by our folks. Let me explain. I'm not going to speak to any particular person because I don't want to violate any rules, but let me give you the general kinds of considerations that go into these things. First of all, the only way in which you can compel, as it were, a person's testimony would be to get a court order after somebody has asserted the Fifth Amendment privilege. So one factor, and there are multiple factors I'll go through here, but one factor is that a grand jury subpoena doesn't give a federal prosecutor the authority to simply force people to talk about things that the prosecutor, or in this instance, the investigative reviewers, might be interested in. In order to properly use a grand jury subpoena, you need to have an active grand jury investigation that's ongoing and a reasonable belief to believe that the person that you want to have come in has relevant information about that information. Otherwise, you run up against claims of grand jury abuse or claims of trying to set a perjury trap or other bad faith reasons. So you can't just subpoena people to make them talk. You can subpoena people when you believe that they have relevant information. So that's a factor. We also take into consideration if a person has previously refused to cooperate, they won't cooperate with you on matters, even matters that they previously talked about. And on prior occasions, those people have repeatedly said, I don't recall, I don't remember, and so forth and so on. You have to make this sort of prudential judgment. Well, okay, if you were to subpoena a person because you can make an argument that they have information that might be relevant to the investigation, is it going to be worth the effort to have them come in and then repeatedly say, I don't recall, I don't recall? You look at the most sensitive piece of information that you all saw in the classified information, right? That source. Mr. Comey was asked about that in a congressional hearing under oath, and he didn't recall it.
Understood. So
you make the decision, okay, are we likely to get something or not?
Mr. Chair.
Yep.
We over?
Yep.
All right.
Gentlelady from Vermont, our newest member, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Durham, thanks so much for being here. I know we've been at this for hours now, so I'll get right to it. Nothing in the report that I've heard so far today or that I've read exonerates Donald Trump. You didn't find that his campaign did not overtly flirt with Russia. You didn't find that he did not attempt to overturn the 2020 election.